Alright, so I'm a little rusty on this whole format of talking about multiple movies that I just saw, so forgive me if this sucks. But we're going to talk about three movies this time, and I think I want to start with The King of Staten Island, which is a movie that I was pretty critical of before it even came out, which is something I tend to try to not do, but I I only get along with Judd Apatow maybe a third of the time, so this I wasn't entirely sure about. It just anytime I see his name, I'm entirely unsure. Like it's probably going to be overlong. There's going to be too much improv, and it's going to go on and get maybe a little too dramatic for its own good. And he just has a pattern, and it's only worked occasionally for me anyway. And I did feel like there was a little something to it, though, which is the thing about it that put a lot of people off, to my understanding, which is that it was going to be like a starring vehicle for Pete Davidson, and I know Pete Davidson can be a little divisive, but for the most part, I've pretty much been a fan of him. I first caught wind of him when he was doing the Comedy Central roast, and I thought he was really funny there. And then now he's been doing the whole acting thing, and I thought he really made a big impression earlier this year with Big Time Adolescence. So I was half worried about this and half thinking it might not be that bad. And yeah, obviously it's going to be a much more personal story, given that it's maybe not like a direct, biography of Pete Davidson or exactly like his real life, but clearly many, many elements from his real life, being that I'm pretty sure he's actually from Staten Island, and of course his dad being a firefighter who died in 9/11, but in the movie it was just a random fire, I guess. And just a couple of things about his personality. He brings up like his Crohn's disease, which I'm pretty sure he actually has, and stuff like that. And I can get where even that aspect would put some people off, because I know many people have criticized him for like when he uses his dad in jokes in like his stand-up or whatever, that people tend to like he's done it so much now that some people see it as like kind of a crutch, or like an easy joke or whatever. But there are many moments in here where he does make jokes, or really other people make jokes about it, and he laughs it off, but you can like actually see like the pain that he's hiding, and it feels like uncomfortably real without having to like overplay itself or like overdo it with emotions. Just kind of watching him live in the moment feels real enough, and I'm glad that Apatow was able to go that route and trust that route, because it does end up making them work quite a bit. Um, and then you've also got another thing that some people consider a crutch, which is self-deprecation, especially if it's done a lot. And so, yeah, with him, Apatow, and another writer putting this together, you can imagine what some of it probably actually came from him. Like that he's at one point, because of like his eyes, he's referred to as an anorexic panda, which is really funny. And it doesn't wear out its welcome in the way you might think. So there is that, and there are some genuinely like touching things here, like right from the start, like the fact that his character's name is Scott, which to my understanding was his dad's name. So that in itself carries something and shows that it is like a sort of labor of love. But then there's also the the I guess you could call it the plot. There's not really one specific plot here, but it is like it goes into that the about a boy territory where the unlikely person befriends children, and it's like a really sweet story and all that. But another story we have going on is another, to my understanding, real aspect of his life is living with his mom, and in this case, his mom is Marissa Tomei, and there's another whole plot here that's kind of more or less the main focus, where his mom has a new boyfriend that is Bill Burr, that he starts off on the really wrong foot with, but then it just kind of, even though we learn that Bill Burr's character, Ray, is actually like a pretty nice guy and a pretty good guy, that initial meeting never really goes away from Davidson's character, and it kind of carries over, but then there's the whole thing, of course, it's because he might be replacing his dad, and that he's also a firefighter, and he thinks that's really fucked up. And there's definitely something there as far as like telling a story about grieving, especially one that comes from a particularly personal place from the lead actor. But the side characters here really work also. Like, obviously, Tomei brings a lot to the mom character, and she's definitely. She plays it up like she's, really loving and almost maybe too forgiving of the fact that, he's still living in her house, but has this dream that he can't really. That seems unrealistic. But there's also a portion. I don't know what's saying too much and what isn't, but when we get to a point that she becomes less forgiving, and it's kind of a character turn that we don't really expect to see in her, given what we saw with her character in the previous scenes. But it also kind of has this real vibe to it once more conflicts start coming into it. And as far as the character of Ray and Burr's performance, because obviously, Burr is another comedian who's known for like his angry rants and all that. I've talked about how I'm not always a fan of his stand-up. It kind of feels like it's kind of the same thing that he's been doing for a very long time. But while he's still, a great comedian regardless of that, it's also interesting to see him play a character like this that when we first see him, we think that's going to be the character, is what you see in his stand-up. But then for literally the rest of the movie, he's like the opposite of that, which is really it's like such this unexpected way. He needs such a like if you were to see this entire character on paper, Bill Burr would be like the last person I think of because it's the reverse that you would expect. You would think that he could play a character that's that angry type throughout and very like shouty, and then maybe at the end he has a little bit of like tenderness or whatever. But it's like literally the reverse of that. He gets one shouty scene and then he apologizes, and then for the rest of it, he's like a genuinely good dude. And there's also a great scene that kind of plays on that expectation when he and Marissa Tomei are out to dinner at the restaurant where Davidson is a busboy, and we get that moment where Tomei like goes to the bathroom, and so it's just the two of them, and Burr invites him to sit down. And it's like because of all the other movies we've seen, this is actually pretty tense at the start because other movies have shaped our minds to think this will be when we see his true colors. And it'll actually be like when Marissa Tomei has her back turned, he's actually a really big douchebag. And it's not that at all. He's like trying so hard to like, understand him and like talk to him in a personal way. And Davidson's the one that has like the force field around him. But the great thing about that is watching their characters go through that, because it's like, we know why. We very much know why Davidson's character is the way he is towards Ray. But the great thing about it is we know that Ray understands where he's coming from also. But he keeps trying, and it does wear thin on Ray pretty fast, but there's still enough, like, understanding in him that there's not that many of those, expected blow-up scenes. Only in, like, crucial conflict scenes is there kind of, he kind of reaches a breaking point. And so that whole relationship and the performances between them and the back and forth between them is handled so, like, authentically, and it just feels like all the characters feel so lived in and everything. And there's even actually a moment where talking about it this way might sound like there might be a bit of a problem in regards to, is Ray too perfect, despite the fact that we do learn that he has breaking points. So they kind of geniusly throw in this other side plot where his ex-wife, Pamela Avalon, is the one that mainly has the kids, and that he goes and picks up and hangs out with because Ray asks him to give him some sort of responsibility in life. And when he talks to the ex-wife at one point, we start to learn things about Ray that definitely don't make him seem as perfect as he might seem. But it's not like a full-on turn of, oh, Ray's not what he thinks he is. It's so, it's such a complex thing in such a human way in how he's shown to be. Like, all the characters are shown to be not perfect whatsoever. But not complete and total fuck-ups either, or complete and total assholes either. And so all of that is handled really well, in a really a surprising way also. Because like I said, this is stuff that, because a lot of the times I feel like this is the kind of stuff that Apatow tries for, but you can so much see the wheels turning that it doesn't work. But here it feels really like sort of, like there's just a flow to it, where it's not trying too hard or anything like that. And another thing that I was worried about was when you talk about the length of Apatow's movies, and this one is no exception. I think it's 2 hours and 17 minutes, which when you see that is very long for a movie like this, even if it's expected of Apatow. But the thing is you can immediately, when you watch some of the other Apatow movies, like Knocked Up or This Is 40 or whatever, you can see how they reach that length. Even I like funny people, but it's probably the worst offender as far as how long his movies can go. But the reason for a lot of that is you can tell that he seems to have a hard time in the editing room in regards to, he usually has a lot of comics on his sets, and he wants them all to just improv. And these are scenes that just meander and go on and on and on, and he doesn't seem to want to cut these down. And that's how his movies get so long. And I was positive this was going to be one of those movies. It had to be, because it's 2 hours and 17 minutes. But weirdly, it's not. I don't recall much of anything that stands out as, okay, this is going on a little too long and this scene could be cut out or whatever. There is one moment where Marissa Tomei, who is, she works at the hospital, and there's one scene where she's with a kid, and she's trying to talk on the phone at the same time, and then the scene should end when she hangs up the phone, but for some reason it continues, and after she hangs up the phone, the kid pukes, and they do, because I think Apatow has to have at least one puking scene in all of his movies, of course, and it's pointless, and they just sit there and they wallow in it. And that's it. But apart from that, I can't really think of much, because there's so much development that Davidson's character goes through that that's where a lot of the runtime comes from. It's just him kind of going slowly through those steps, and in the scenes where like he's just hanging out with his friends or whatever, almost, maybe not quite, but almost feel like, they reach like the quality of Linklater scenes. Like Richard Linklater's movies, where people just kind of, there'll be long scenes of people just kind of talking, and it's maybe less something like Dazed and Confused and more like those, like the scenes in Boyhood that do that is kind of what it feels like, but there's not too much of that I even remember, and it's like there's almost just enough of it, so it's really kind of just, it being that long is just kind of something that just happens. Like I said, I really can't think of that many moments where I was like, okay, this is unnecessary, which I do through a lot of Judd Apatow movies, through a lot of scenes in a lot of his movies. But this one just kind of goes with it and ends up finding its place. And the way they throw in the other characters also, like Steve Buscemi in particular and the other firefighters that are there, there's this, like, because they're characters throughout. And the great thing about this is usually it'd be the moment where I'm saying, okay, wrap the movie up, but they're there for a while, and he like starts to hang out with them, and then pretty late into the movie, we finally get a scene where he's just sitting around with these other firefighters, and they're just sort of talking and trading stories, but it's like, I kind of wanted that. Like throughout the movie, I was thinking, like, we should get a scene like that, because there's something to these characters, especially it would give Steve Buscemi more screen time. And it's like, by the time it finally got there at the end, it was like, I wasn't saying, okay, you can wrap the movie up now. It was like, finally, this scene can happen where we just listen to these characters. And, yeah, it's stuff like that that gets it to where it needs to go. And so, eventually we get to an ending where, you see, here's the thing, is this movie, as far as I can think of, except maybe Funny People, is the closest that Apatow seems to have come to, like, a full-on drama. But obviously it's a comedy, but there's, like, the perfect balance of the two. Because that's another way in which Apatow's movies feel like they start to drag, is they start off as full-on comedies, like very, very much comedies with hardly any drama whatsoever, and then by the time the drama comes in, it starts to wallow in that, and then tries to become drama almost full-time by the end, and then it's like, fuck off. It's like, learn what you want to be before you start. But there's always such a balance in this one that whenever there's comedy, it feels right, and whenever there's drama, it feels right. And they pretty much always balance themselves out. So, yeah, so by the time it gets to the end, and we have a full dramatic moment where he kind of comes to, like, he kind of comes to a sense of closure in a way, and there's no. It's like you can sense just how real it feels, like we were talking about, but it also, like I was saying, this would be, like I was saying, how a lot of the emotions are pretty downplayed for the better throughout the movie. So you would think if they were going to go somewhat big with the emotions, it would be this final moment when he kind of reaches closure and he talks to his mom in a way that's kind of wraps everything up. But no, it's just as downplayed, and it makes the scene significantly stronger because of that. So yeah, so it actually is really good, I thought, and like I said, it is. As far as if there's anything, I guess, that like really brings it down, apart from every now and then there's something where I could say you really didn't need to go that far. You can see like the worst aspects of Apatow coming out. Um, I guess it's just that there's not a whole lot of like flair to Apatow as a director, and I know for a story like this there doesn't need to be. But I don't know, it does almost feel like when you talk about it having to go straight to VOD, it's like this movie doesn't feel that out of place being direct to VOD. But at the same time, I do wonder how it would play with audiences, but I suppose we're not going to know that. Apparently it was supposed to go to drive-ins, and then Universal like pulled it at the last minute for some monetary reason, I don't know. But yeah, so that did turn out really well, and I'm trying to think if it might be my second favorite Apatow movie, if I had to rank them, because the 40-year-old version is pretty much far and away my favorite of his movies, so, but I would probably say this is second to that, because I know a lot of people love Knocked Up, but I don't. I just never have. So, yeah, and this honestly could have been another train wreck, which, as in the movie Trainwreck, the movie he made with Amy Schumer. And while I'm not one of those people that just outright hates Amy Schumer, I didn't really care for Trainwreck. And even being the giant, massive Bill Hader fan that I am, just Trainwreck didn't really do anything for me. And it's like, this pretty much could have been, this basically set itself up as Pete Davidson's version of Trainwreck, where Trainwreck was kind of Amy Schumer somewhat telling her story, but also not really, but kind of. And he pretty much did the same thing here with Pete Davidson, but this turned out a lot better. So, yeah. So let's go on to The Five Bloods, Spike Lee's new movie. His next one right after BlacKkKlansman, which was my favorite movie of 2018. And so there's a lot of things to say here to lead into it before we even talk about the movie itself. For starters, it was billed as a Spike Lee war movie. And when you think Spike Lee war movie, you probably go back to Miracle at St. Anna. And I saw Miracle at St. Anna, and that's about all I remember liking it for the most part, but it obviously apparently didn't leave an extremely lasting impression. I don't think I've even seen it since it came out, which would have been 12 years ago. And so it was like, well, alright, I won't expect it to be as good as his last movie, and we'll see where we end up. And it's a Vietnam movie, and obviously so many great movies have come from that, so it's like, surely he can do something with it and it'll be fine. And then it came out, and obviously reviews were raving it, and audiences who, audiences were half saying it's great, half saying it's very divisive, saying there's very many words to say it's divisive among audiences. So, and obviously an inevitable complaint is going to be that the rave reviews are solely because of current events, and that it just happens to be coming out at this particular time. But the thing is I don't think that, I mean, I'm sure, I haven't read any of them, but I'm sure most of, if not all of the reviews focus a lot on that, and its connotation with current events and all that. Especially with the way they are brought into this the same way they were at the end of BlacKkKlansman. But the thing is that, because it's like it's actually kind of the reverse of what BlacKkKlansman did, where BlacKkKlansman has us in like the past, and then we have this like scarily seamless transition into current footage. Here we start off with footage from the past, and then we have a scarily seamless transition into present day. But the thing about that is that it's Spike Lee being accused of being like extremely unsubtle, being extremely political, and hitting us over the head with a sledgehammer to get his points across. But when people make that criticism, it makes me wonder if they've ever fucking seen a Spike Lee movie, like ever. Because the thing is, and I'm not saying Spike Lee always has the hottest takes. He certainly by no means has a spotless filmography. But he's got a lot of great ones, and a lot of them use issues like this. And obviously between this and BlacKkKlansman, current events have obviously really been inspirational to him artistically, and he's putting out, in a row, two of the best movies he's ever made. Like I said, like it's obviously apparent on if you're not new to this channel that BlacKkKlansman was my favorite movie of 2018. I am struggling to decide if I like this even more. So that's pretty much where I stand as far as right here. So, but that's the thing though, is regardless of the quality, I really appreciate Spike Lee as the kind of guy that is completely unsubtle, not just in his movies, but in real life also. And it's like the fact that Spike Lee, whenever he states an opinion, you will hear it. And it's like the fact that he can take that part of his personality and put it so vividly in his movies to where you watch the movies and he is so in tune with his work, because you can sense like every now and then a director will start to feel like a distance between their work, and it's like, really, that person made this? But every single one of Spike Lee's movies, outside of a recent remake he may have done that even he didn't care for and he's trying to distance himself from, but the movies like this, you watch them on screen and they literally feel like they're pouring right out of his mouth and just right into our eyes and ears. And these past two in particular are so strong in such an interesting way, because once again, some people might complain that they're like all politics and they'll dismiss it just for that. But the way he's able to incorporate them and make actual as far as taking the points he was making with BlacKkKlansman and putting them with something that felt like the French Connection was absolute genius. And then this is something I didn't know going into this movie, and that may be why it had such an impact on me, because it was like, holy shit, what an incredible idea. When you take something like, say, the French Connection, for instance, and you put it with the themes he did with BlacKkKlansman, you now take the themes he wants to do with the Five Bloods, and he's worked the Treasure of the Sierra Madre into it. Like, a lot of the Treasure of the Sierra Madre. And I did not realize that's what he was going for until I was watching it. And it's like slowly dawned on me. I was like, wow, this kind of feels like that. And then Jonathan Majors did Walter Houston's Dance. And then it was like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, that's exactly what they're going for. And then they put... It may have been a little too much that they brought the badges line into it. Maybe that might be where I draw the line, but still, it was nice to absolutely have it confirmed. That's totally what he was going for. Once again, for all is forgiven, because that's the kind of... You need to know going into a movie like this. If you go into a Spike Lee movie knowing the kind of filmmaker he is, knowing he's not in any way trying to be subtle, and not only that, he will go out of his way to be as unsubtle as possible to get his point across. If that's not what you want, it's on you for going into a Spike Lee movie. Because his style is still very much here. His shots he's been using since the beginning of time are all here, all this stuff. Characters talk directly into the camera. You get the dolly shot at the end of it. You get all that stuff. All the Spike Lee stuff is here. But he's also telling a really, really great story here. Because you say, like, he wants to get these political points across and all that, but it's like, if it's gonna be like, and as far as like, people praise, like critics praising it just because of current events, it's like, I can see praising a movie for its importance, but the thing is it's like if it's like really, it needs to be really well made. It needs to have like at least a little bit of an entertaining factor, and it needs to have something that's really gonna like pull you in on an emotional level. And this movie has all three of those things overwhelmingly. It is extremely well made. There's plenty of entertaining aspects to it, and it's intense as fuck. And because you're just, I can see where like maybe the first hour could be a little shaky, where we're like meeting the characters, we're getting the flashbacks and all that stuff. But by the time we reach about the hour mark, or maybe the midway point, it is like intense scene after intense scene after intense scene, and it becomes relentless as it goes on. And you would think that it would almost be like contrived to put like a real like sort of plot into a movie like this, especially something that's saying something so much bigger. But no, they really, much like BlacKkKlansman, the plot itself works so well. It might seem a bit more, you know, what's interesting is obviously BlacKkKlansman seems far-fetched if you don't realize it's an actual story, but with this being a fictional story inside many, you know, real elements, it can also be seen as a far-fetched story, but I still feel like it works. Because like I said, since everything is so blatant anyway, why can't, you know, we have some suspension of disbelief in, you know, the plot aspect of it. Where there's even like a villain in this movie. Like, that's how, like, plot-y, if you want to call it that, it eventually gets. But I feel like all of it was working for me. I think a lot of that also has to do with how strong the characters are. Because we've got Clark Peters is here, Isaiah Whitlock Jr., there is Jonathan Majors, who I mentioned from Last Black Man in San Francisco. Norm Lewis is the other guy, who's somebody I'm not entirely familiar with. I think he's mostly on like the stage. And of course, at the center of it, a previous Spike Lee collaborator with Delroy Lindo, a frequent Spike Lee collaborator in Delroy Lindo. And this performance has been talked about a lot. Like, before I even saw the movie, I was hearing just nonstop that, like, even with a delayed Oscar ceremony this year, number one, Delroy Lindo is a frontrunner as of now, as early as we are, but also, he better fucking stay in that status, because this is unbelievable, because it's set up right. If you want to talk about the politics of it and how people complain about that, what's interesting at the start about this character that Delroy Lindo plays is that it sets up very early on that he has a certain political affiliation, and when you hear that and you know Spike Lee's stance, you might think that character is going to be treated a certain way throughout the entire movie. He's going to be a caricature, and that'll be the end of it. But he's the most complex character in the movie by far, which might be something that a lot of people aren't expecting if they see the character set up. And everything is, like, everything from... I don't even know how to explain it. There's just so much going on with this character, but I also... There's some spoiler territory here also I'm kind of trying to dance around, but there is so much this character is, like, inside him that's, like coming out sometimes boisterously, sometimes in really slow, sort of building ways. And he gets so many scenes where, like, there's even, where I talk about talking directly in the camera, there are moments towards the end where we just get him, like, monologuing towards the camera, where it's like, it's sort of like half mania and half him, like, really coming to an understanding of his surroundings and what's going on and all that other stuff, and coming to, like, conclusions that are a long time coming for him. There's we could be here all day if we go into the aspects of this character, and I'd also have to go into full on, like, going into, like, the end. But, yeah, there's a lot here, but there's also, some things, like, some emotional beats in the middle, where I was talking about... One of the cast members I didn't mention was Chadwick Boseman, who started off as their leader when they were in the Vietnam War. And this is, before I go into Chadwick Boseman, there is something here that is probably going to get criticism, which is we have the four of them here, and obviously they are much older. But then we have the flashbacks to Vietnam, where they are under the command of Chadwick Boseman, who obviously looks significantly younger than them because they don't look that much different than they do now. They didn't get like young actors to play the younger versions of them. They just play them in Vietnam. And I can see that being distracting to some people, but the thing about that is it's so, when you think about it, it could be a case of like when, no matter how old you get, when you think back to things from like your childhood or whatever, for the most part you're remembering them as you are now. Like it feels like you have to really struggle to think back and have a memory and imagine yourself as like whatever age you were at that time. There's a piece of you that always goes back, your current self, that goes back with a memory when you remember it. And I want to say he's doing something like that, because it would be so easy to just cast younger actors that I feel like it has to be an artistic choice. Like, I would just be really surprised if that wasn't the case. But then you talk about the Chadwick Boseman character, who at some point we learned, because obviously the whole plot is that they're back to find his remains because he was killed while they were over there. So we know during these flashbacks at some point inevitably that will happen, but until then we keep having these flashbacks of what it was that Del Orlando's character had such a connection with him, and that of course brings in like stuff of very much of that era that just happens to coincide with stuff that you could link within the past few weeks. Is the reason that these characters make the decisions that they do. And he really Chadwick Boseman really does have like that commanding presence, even among actors that are very much his senior. But he has to be the one in command, and he just really owns that. And also within these Vietnam scenes, you have him playing with the aspect ratio in a really cool way, where it might seem a little easy and obvious, but I love it anyway. Where it's obviously all the present day scenes are just in like the normal widescreen, but then whenever we transition to Vietnam, it closes in and it's like more of the traditional aspect ratio, and it starts to look almost like it was shot on film from the early 70s. And then every time it transitions back to present day, we actually see the transition back into widescreen. And it's amazing. It reminds me of this really great thing that he did in Crooklyn, when the family goes to see the relatives, and because the relatives in their house are like so alien to the kids, that the entire middle sequence of Crooklyn, when they're at the relative's house, the script, like the whole format is like distorted and like squeezed together and stretched out, and I just love when he does, like, I know you're supposed to criticize a director when they get too showy, but it's the ways in which Spike Lee gets really showy that make his movies so unique. And it's kind of the stuff that a large portion of the reason we go to Spike Lee movies still is to see that sort of flourish that he just puts on everything, and those little touches and that flair he puts on it just never gets old. And this one really, really goes into that. But then you also have like the stuff where they're reacting to the events while they're in Vietnam, which is told to them through this radio personality, this woman that's kind of, in a sense, you might get a vibe of Samuel Jackson and Do the Right Thing. So it's like through her, they hear about Martin Luther King's assassination, and we like see their reactions, and there's these really powerful emotional scenes. And of course, they're going to be crossing, real life footage and images along with all this stuff. And that's how we start the movie, also, as I was saying. And then we bring more characters into it, where there's at one point where you might think they're maybe going into too much, like more so than necessary, like when Jonathan Majors' character meets a French girl. And this sort of seems like something where it's like, I wonder if this is really necessary, because the movie's over 2.5 hours, and what are they doing with this? But just about anything that seems like it's here that's maybe not necessary, more than likely will be very, very necessary, and we will learn as it goes on and things start to unravel a little more. And to continue with the Black Klansman comparisons, there is two characters that the French girl brings in with her, who are Paul Walter Hauser and God, I cannot remember his name now. The guy that played Felix in Black Klansman are here also throughout this cast. Like I said, once they all get involved, the movie just goes into this territory of just feeling like non-stop suspenseful and just really intense. And like I said, in this, and all the once it reaches that intensity, interestingly enough, is it's following an extremely emotional scene, like a really, really potent scene. And then it just goes into what it's going into, and just all of it was working for me. So, like I said, these last two movies are just like the perfect one-two punch. They make a perfect double feature. Also, like I'm kind of excited at the prospect of watching them back to back at some point. As I said, it's the two best movies he's done in a long time. So yeah, and so that's pretty much where, like, this is another case where I'm hoping once we start doing the awards videos, I'll be able to go more into, like, when it's been out a little longer, I might go into like the sort of deeper aspects of it, because it'll be a movie surely that's coming up a lot, hopefully. So that's, like, and it's obviously goes without saying, but the kind of year that we're in, it's my favorite movie of the year so far. But we do have big stuff coming. We've got Nolan's movie coming. We've got Fincher's movie coming. So we'll see what happens. But this is the bar is suddenly very high for this year. So we'll see what happens now that we're getting more stuff rolling out. So let's just go ahead and end on Artemis Fowl, which I think I used up all my passion. So there's, even if I hadn't, there's not really any passion here. So. Like Kenneth Branagh's name's on it, but can you really? That's what I. There you go. Here's a prime example of when I was talking about whenever you see a Spike Lee movie, regardless of quality, you can see Spike Lee's mouth just opening and the movie comes out, and it's like a signature, and you'd never in a million years could tell this was a Kenneth Branagh movie, just not in any way whatsoever. So even Thor had some somewhat Shakespearean aspects to it that you could tell he was trying to bring into it. I don't know what the hell this is, but yeah. So as far as the books go, I had a friend in 6th grade. We were in school one day and he was reading this. He had just started it. And somebody had asked him, "What are you reading?" And he said, "Artemis Fowl." And he showed us the cover. And then I never heard about Artemis Fowl again until this movie was announced. I didn't know anything going in apart from the fact that the first book existed. That's it. So, yeah, and it's one of those cases where, kind of like what I was talking about with The King of Staten Island, but here in a much more derogatory way. It's interesting that this has such a big budget, has such a big director, was going to be some big franchise movie and all that, was going to be in theaters, do that whole thing. But I mean, you watch this on Disney Plus, and it just looks and feels like it was made for streaming. It does not come off as big budget at all. It does not come off cinematic at all. It's just missing just about everything it needs to be anything of worth, anything memorable whatsoever. I don't think... I watched it today, actually. I watched it earlier today, and I'm not going to remember anything probably by tomorrow. It's just going to be gone. So, it's... What? He's like this... He's got his dad, who is Colin Farrell, who might as well not even be here. And we've got the kid, and eventually... we've got the kid, Artemis Fowl, who's like this, you know, master, criminal of sorts, or supposed to be, or something. And then we have Colin Farrell captured. Captured by a villain that's basically No-Face from Dick Tracy. I swear it's the same voice. But the thing is it's, there's a video on this channel where I give Big Trouble in Little China shit for having a big, ultimate, 2,000 plus year old villain named David. And it's like, well, that's silly. Well, get a load of this. The big villain with the shadowed face and the intimidating voice is named Opal. So the really evil mastermind Opal has captured Colin Farrell, and now the kid has to work with Josh Gad and this underworld of like elves and fairies or whatever that work for Judi Dench. You know, because it's Kenneth Branagh, he scored her. Anybody else, I don't know. But everybody here looks like the only person that like seems like they're trying to get into this is Josh Gad, but it doesn't really end up working. I mean, God bless him for trying, but it doesn't really work in his favor. So there's that. And all these characters they introduce, there's the butler, and there's the butler's daughter, and just all these people are working together. But the thing is like, the butler's daughter is a character that I just kept forgetting was even in it. So, and it's that kind of movie. We have major characters, you just kind of forget that are in it. And then we get moments of, there's a whole lot, because obviously they're trying so hard to set up a franchise. They come from a franchise of books, they're trying to please their fans, I guess, though I think I heard the fans weren't really that into it either, the book fans anyway. So they're trying to squeeze a lot into it, and it's only an hour and 35 minutes, which is, it's mercifully short, because it's so bad, it's a good thing that it's short. But I mean, as far as setting up a whole world where you wanted to clearly set up a franchise of sorts, I don't think that's going to cut it, especially if you're not even using the characters you have. Forget building the fucking world. So we get a lot of exposition, of course, but this is one of those many, many movies, sort of like The Maze Runner comes to mind, where the Maze Runner movies aren't terrible or anything, but good God, are they like a perfect poster child for bad exposition. That and the second Independence Day movie are like... I don't know that exposition has gotten any worse than the second Independence Day movie, unless I'm mistaken. But here we get what appears to be like parody of exposition, is what it feels like. We get moments where a dude is talking to Judi Dench, and he's like... They send off the elf girl or the fairy or whatever she is, and they're like, oh, we're going to send her off, are we? Well, we can't trust her because her dad stole from us. He stole that thing that's like that precious it's the most precious artifact in our civilization. And then after he did that, he disappeared. And then he tries to back that up by saying, as you know, every other time he says something. Just to say, like, we know you know this as a character, but we have to tell the audience, but it's just fucking dumb. It sounds really dumb, and there's no smarter way they found to do this. So it's just absolutely dreadful writing, of course, as you would expect anyway. And there's even moments that go beyond that, because Gad's character is narrating the movie to us after he's been, like, apprehended. And so we get him, like, talking to the camera and, like, telling the story, and it's like, oh, you'll never meet anybody as remarkable as Artemis Fowl. Like, I feel like Artemis Fowl himself is barely in the movie, but whatever. It's like the real hero of the movie is that, elf or fairy girl or whoever she is. It doesn't matter. Because there won't be another one of these anyway. There just won't be. But anyway, so yeah, we do get stuff that looks like it would be cool and clever in a way, where there's like a whole sequence where they go around and they like stop time and they do like a Men in Black Dark City sort of thing, where they like rearrange it and they wipe the memories and all that. But it's all recycled shit. It's all shit that we've seen before. I don't even know how long these books have been around, but it's shit we've seen before anyway. And every now and then they'll throw in random references. Josh Gad makes a reference to David Bowie that I thought was kind of funny. But apart from that, it mostly feels pretty forced. And, I was talking about Josh Gad with the exposition stuff, with him talking to the camera and all that. Yeah, he's also narrating throughout, because it's all told from that perspective, after he's been apprehended. But the thing is like, sometimes when he's explaining stuff to us, it'll literally be stuff that we're watching, like, on the screen. Like, he's not setting something up, and then what we see elaborates. He's literally just narrating. It's one of those cases where, like, you can put on that audio for, like, visually impaired people, and it, like, explains what's on the screen. That's basically what Josh Gad's job is as far as narrating goes. and then he's shitty comedy relief for the rest of the time. What else would you expect? And yeah, and obviously this has been a failure to just about every, like I think I read that its Rotten Tomatoes score keeps going down, and nobody is going like even if this had gone like you would think streaming would be the best thing to happen to this movie because obviously it was gonna just completely crash and burn if it went into theaters, and it's like still crashing and burning as a streaming release. It's like nobody gives a fuck about it as far as I've seen anyway. Maybe those lone people are... I'm sure those lone people are out there because they always are. Saying like, oh, why is this so underrated? Oh, I didn't think it was that bad. I found it entertaining or whatever the fuck. And it's not to hate on those people. God bless anybody that can find, entertainment in a movie, regardless of its quality. But there's just nothing here. And it's like, it's one of those movies that's so... Not only is it, like I said, actually weirdly too short, even though it is a bad movie too short. But the thing is it's like, when we're at the climax, I didn't realize it was the climax. It just feels like another unremarkable action scene, and then suddenly it's like 15 minutes of wrap-up. Yeah, a movie that's, when you take off the credits, not even an hour and a half. It's like an hour 20-something when the credits kick in, and it takes 15 minutes of, like, wrap-up once everything's over. And that's the, franchise building that's never going to happen. So when you look at that, it's like, you feel bad for the kid playing Artemis Fowl because, him and his douchey look with his douchey looking suit and his douchey looking sunglasses are the face of this. He probably went into this and it was like being told like, dude, you're going to be the next Daniel Radcliffe. This is going to be your thing. This is going to be your big franchise, dude, and you're going to be the face of it. You're the title character. Your face is the posters. All that stuff. And this is what it is. And it's like, that's gotta fuck somebody up. Somebody needs to keep an eye on this kid after this. It's like, no kid should have to go through being in this movie, let alone being the face of it. So, pity. Put all the pity you can muster on this. But it's, yeah, like I said, maybe one of the best things about it is that it's mercifully short, even if it's something that is not helping it at the same time. Because you can't... I don't know. This was just bound to fail, apparently. Like, every single thing is working against this. Except for hiring an obviously capable director, but... You look at, is it even his movie? I can't even tell. Was Kenneth Branagh even on the set? I don't know. But anyway, that's where Artemis Fowl leaves us. I don't have much to say about it. So the next thing we're going to do review-wise is I am going to do like a big catch-up on 2020 movies. So it's going to be one of those big things, and that should be around this time next week. But in the meantime, we'll still have more videos from my brother, and there's 4 more of the Stephen King videos. And then it'll be up to Owen to figure out what fills in those gaps. But me and my brother will still be doing our thing, so yeah. And hopefully these streaming releases and VOD releases end up being more frequent now that we're in summer and we can kind of pick these back up without getting too behind. And yes, so until all that other stuff, I think that's it for this.